welcome, Professor, to Schulich Marketing Association's podcast, Beyond Brands. Let's start with the formal introduction. Today, we are honored to welcome Ashley Konson to the podcast. He's the president of the Global Brand Leaders Incorporated and an esteemed faculty member at the Schulich School of Business, where he serves as an adjunct professor of marketing and the associate director of the Master of Marketing program. With a career spanning senior marketing roles at global giants like Nestlé, Disney, and IMAX, Ashley brings a wealth of experience in brand strategy and leadership. His work goes beyond just growing brands. He's passionate about blending the latest academic research on how brands thrive with real-world practices from top marketing professionals worldwide. He's also highly regarded for his dedication to teaching, having been recognized multiple times for his excellence in the classroom. Again, we're excited today to dive into Ashley's career journey, his views on brand growth and management, and gain insights on everything from personal branding to evolving role of digital marketing. And thank you for joining us.
You are very welcome. I must say I'm delighted to be here today. I'm delighted to be at Schulich this semester. And I think that perhaps your opening was a little bit extravagant, but much appreciated anyway. Okay.
Agree to disagree, Professor, because we've heard amazing things about you.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
So we wanted to start off with your career journey and what your early influences were. You have had an amazing career, again, working for these amazing brands. What drew you into brand management initially, and how did that interest evolve over time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You can hear my accent is a little bit different. As you know, Zimbabwe is the best cricket team in the world, top cricket team, and all other teams aspire to be Zimbabwe. By that, I'm telling you that I was born in Zimbabwe.
Absolutely.
The country used to be called Rhodesia. When I was very young, I served as an infantry officer. Sadly, we had a war called the Rhodesian Bush War, which anyone can look up on the internet to understand the background and context for it. And this is all germane because when I finished my service, I was 20 years old. So I was very young as a second lieutenant in an infantry unit. And I went off to University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. And it was there that I had decided to study to become a lawyer. But I was going to go the route, my father was a lawyer, I was going to go the route BCom LLB. And in my very first year studying, I took a class called marketing. And Philip Kotler, I think we're studying the second edition of his famous textbook. He made a comment. Marketing is the art of serving consumers profitably. And I was very enamored with that thought that marketing is really business. That was the first part of it. The second part of it was already in going to university, being out of the military, I was wondering if I would stay in Southern Africa. It's a beautiful place. The people are beautiful across all the racial divides. But I wanted to go somewhere, given what had transpired in my life in the previous few years, where it didn't matter about your religion, the color of your skin, your racial background. It was really about the values that represented you and represented the country. And I was already thinking of moving to New Zealand or to Canada at that time. So when I took that marketing course, as enamored as I was with Kotler's writing, I thought, I'm going to go into a career in marketing. And the thing about marketing is it's an international language. Law in South Africa is something that emanates from Dutch. And so the law is quite different from many other countries. I'm glad I took that. And very fortunate when in my last year at university, I interviewed with Nestlé and I found myself in a sales role. Everybody at Nestlé started in sales. It was a way for you to understand the trade before you moved into marketing. 6 months later, I was promoted to a junior marketing job and I've never looked back.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Seeing that how we're currently reading the 17th edition of Kotler, it really shows us how far we've come.
It really ages me. Thank you very much.
That was never the intention, Professor. And now discussing Nestlé is a great segue. And even Disney included. Could you share a pivotal moment from your time at Disney or Nestlé that shaped your approach to branding?
Well, let me expand on that very briefly. I mean, my journey was Nestlé, then Disney, then IMAX, the location-based business, and then Holt Renfrew as Chief Marketing Officer. The foundation of my brand management knowledge, as much as I'd like to say it came from the University of Natal in KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa, my finishing school was Nestlé. It was there that I learned the formal frameworks, how to go about analyzing a marketplace to discern opportunity, building strategy, writing positioning statements, and then executing the famous 4 Ps. And so I had a very strong grounding in the basics. When I went off to Disney, I realized how important that was. But at Disney, my job was really about brand communication because the product came from the studios. And I realized there was a little bit of a disconnect between the studio teams and the marketing teams. Our job was to sell the films, promote the films. But it's typical of a studio model. At IMAX, my job was different. I was both head of communication for the IMAX network, 200 theaters, but I was also responsible for opening and for the marketing of IMAX owned and operated theaters. And I was involved on the ground in the United States, opening an IMAX theater in Miami, an IMAX theater in Sacramento, and an IMAX theater in Providence, Rhode Island, where I got to learn a lot about retail identity, brand identity inside the box and on the exterior of the box to really help it stand out in the market. And I still use that in my course today. And then, of course, my last corporate job was in the retail environment with Holt Renfrew. Holt Renfrew was looking for someone who specifically understood brand management and somebody who understood the whole idea of entertainment. The belief being that within a retail box, you should be building brands and creating entertaining experiences. And so it was the perfect fit. The one thing that I would say across all of these contexts, which still informs my teaching today, is that it's always the same thing. You've got to know the basics. With the basics, you can practice marketing in any arena. What is different is the context. So unless you do a deep dive into understanding the context, you can't really use your knowledge or the tools that you've gained. And occasionally there are some new tools to learn. That's a matter of reading. It's a matter of lifelong learning. You can pick those up actually quite quickly as long as you stay true to your craft.
Many professionals look to Disney and Nestlé as dream jobs. What lessons do you have for these from these early roles did you have that resonate with you till this day?
That's a good question. I'll go back to what I've already said. Packaged goods is a wonderful arena to get to think of as your finishing school and beyond. People build whole careers there. And that's because they really understand how to diagnose markets, to discern opportunity. They really understand how to develop strategy, how to execute on that strategy extremely well with the 4 Ps. They understand brand measurement, brand research, consumer buyer behavior. So it's a wonderful school in that area. And that's really what I would suggest to anybody they can get from that arena. And you're thinking about brand management as the entire enchilada. When I went to Disney, remember I said that it was just an exercise in brand communications, really, the job that I did. But here's what I learned at Disney, which I think, was probably my primary lesson. They're very entrepreneurial. It's a big organization. It lacks sometimes structure, sometimes process, though it has those. But the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well. And it's something that I think everyone can take away something very valuable from. In many ways, IMAX was the same. IMAX allowed me to take my thinking about marketing into location-based marketing because of the 7 owned and operated theaters that I was responsible for, and into understanding, designing brand experiences when we opened the Providence, Rhode Island theater. So there were some powerful lessons, some add-ons. but they still came from the basics I learned at Nestlé in terms of concepts like brand platforms and brand identity, et cetera, et cetera. And then at Holt Renfrew, again, I think the most important lesson that I learned, because, again, I was responsible for marketing communications for the brand, but for marketing communications, but I wasn't responsible for the product or for how the stores were run. There was a head of operations, and they were heads of the merchandise divisions, ladies' wear and men's wear. So I really, I think, got to think about organizational focus, integration, coordination around the brand as a frame for focusing everybody so that everybody is rowing in the same direction. It was a wonderful lesson that I learned there.
Absolutely. Now moving on to brand management, the subject itself, you emphasize an importance of integrated research, backed insights into brand growth. What are some of the most influential frameworks or theories that inform your approach?
When I speak to clients today, and when I speak to my master level students in my classroom, because I teach Masters of Marketing, I teach MBA, I teach Executive MBA on the Schulich Executive MBA. We are part of the global network, a partner with the Kellogg School of Management. I always talk about the two schools of marketing thought that exist today. The one is the one that I studied, that I became enamored with, Kotler, the Kotler School of Marketing, which has many other followers, David Acker and many others that I won't mention now given the time constraints. And it's the one we all know. And that is a school that is based on the famous segmentation, targeting, positioning. But I would add an extra element. Segmentation to first determine, are there consumers who are underserved or not served that we can see are looking for a unique offering that a player in the market can provide to them uniquely in some way that somebody else can't. That's how we get segmentation, the idea of differentiation, targeting, and then positioning. It's all around this idea of differentiation. And in fact, it follows Michael Porter's research and teaching, this idea of there are primarily two ways to achieve competitive advantage. The first way is through differentiation. The second way is through cost leadership. So that's the one school. The second school is what we'd call the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute of Marketing Science, which comes out of Australia. And in 2018, I started to move a lot of my teaching in my class towards that. Still teaching the Kotler School because it's still, I think, very important to understand, and it has important implications in some markets. But the Ehrenberg-Bass School, their research and their thinking and most of their writing today is not based on around the idea of differentiation. Why? Because they have demonstrated that you do not need to be differentiated in markets to succeed. There are lots and lots of successful brands that are not differentiated in the way that Porter imagined to achieve competitive advantage. They stand out a little bit. They're distinctive in markets. And so their framework, the framework that comes out of Ehrenberg-Bass, is focus on penetration, build two market-based assets, mental and physical availability, and build distinctiveness in the market as a way to stand out. And their research has provided real evidence that we should be considering those approaches or that thinking through law-like buying behavior patterns in the market, double jeopardy, duplication of purchase, natural monopoly, buyers profiles are very similar across brands in the same markets, and then a mathematical model called the MBD Derelicht model, which proves that these patterns of buying behavior exist across most markets, from B2C to B2B.
Right. Absolutely. What would you say for students or recent grads, the importance of personal branding? And how can they start building theirs while still in school?
Actually, my last class in my brand management course at Schulich is a course in personal branding. I shamefully or shamelessly use myself as a model for that, because in order to do something on personal branding, you have to know the subject very well. So I can tell my own story, but it's not the only story that I tell. I do tell stories of some other much more truly famous people. I'd say there are two types of fame: big fame and small fame. And everybody better achieve some kind of fame in their life if they hope to be successful. I never aspired to big fame, and I'll talk about somebody who's really famous in a moment. I aspired to little fame. I wanted to be well regarded in my field of advising and teaching, certainly in North America, but I was less interested in building a brand internationally. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because Canada became my home and I wanted to give something back to Canada. In my class on personal branding, the place where I start is, if you don't understand yourself very well, you can't build a strong personal brand. Why? Because you need to understand, what are your aspirations? How much money do you want to make? And what are you prepared to give up, which is maybe the most important question, to achieve those things? Because if you want something, it means that you are making a strategic choice, which means that you are choosing to give up other things. I also, at the same time, when I started teaching, when I moved from the corporate world into advising and teaching, I decided to define my values. So not only should you understand those three things, but you should also understand what drives you internally. What are your values, your beliefs, your principles, whatever you want to call them. And at that stage, I came up with a number, the first one being lifelong learning. That's what drove my interest into wanting to be a teacher. I really wanted to be a student rather than a teacher. Why? Because my second value was catalyst for better. I wanted to be a student so that I could help others to learn and learn from others. So lifelong learning, catalyst for better, and then humanity, which I defined as my third value. And my third value is really why I came to Canada. Why I only thought about Canada and New Zealand. It was really about my belief that as people, we're all flesh, blood, bones. Yes, there are some things that differ, make us different, but there's much more that makes us the same. We have the same needs, the same wants, the same biology. And I guess I wanted to express that in the classroom. And then finally, my last value is, if you really want to be good at something, you should love what you do. At least like what you do. If you don't, how can you really stand out in the marketplace? Absolutely. So that's literally how I start my personal branding class. I take students through how I got there, how I defined it. Large fame, big fame, would be somebody like Mark Ritson. Mark Ritson is a very noted personality in the marketing world today. Marketing Week in the UK. He runs a program for them, the Mini MBA Brand Management, the Mini MBA Marketing. He's a PhD out of an Australian university. He won teaching awards in the United States. He has been an advisor to some of the top brand companies, LVMH, for instance, across all of the divisions. He speaks around the world. And if you ask how he's built his brand not just from saying it, but by doing it. That's how you build brands. You build brands by doing it. And then you can build your profile by saying what you do afterwards.
Absolutely. That's a great insight. Any advice you have for various companies when you see common challenges they face as a brand in creating meaningful connections with customers?
In creating meaningful, you mean today or in the future or in the past?
It could be in the past. It could even be some in a way that a company didn't handle a situation well.
Well, okay, so it's a broad question, and because it can be answered in many different ways. So I'm going to start in the way that I know best. Go back to basics.
Yeah.
Understanding the market, seeking opportunity, building strategy, executing through the 4 Ps. By the way, we always talk about the 4 Ps, but, when we think about designing service experiences, we have to think about the 7 Ps rather than the 4 Ps. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but things like people, physical evidence, process are crucial for anything that could be considered a service brand, which includes most retail brands.
Absolutely.
But so I would say that's the center of it all. Understanding the market is about really the competition, the 3 Cs, if we just use that simple framework: the competition, the potential customer, and then the company. And understanding the customer is really about understanding what their basic needs are, using that to try to understand different customer types based on those needs, thinking through how your product or your service might be fashioned in a way that provides them with the value that they are seeking. And that allows you to then build a strategy and think about execution. Sadly, too many companies think the job is done at that stage. But of course, any company that is worth its while continuously engages in market scanning. Why? Because customers' needs and changes evolve given new technologies, etc., new desires from them in terms of how they what might constitute satisfaction of a need. And so companies need to keep themselves constantly in the business of market scanning to understand those, so that over time they can evolve, if they need to, their strategy, and if their strategy doesn't need to be evolved, the way that they execute, so that it's in keeping with those evolving consumer needs.
Absolutely. With your experience across different industries, what's your advice for a brand seeking to establish a unique identity in an extremely crowded marketplace?
I'm going to have to go back to one of the earlier questions you asked, because remember the 2 schools of marketing, the Kotler School and the Ehrenberg-Bass School? Well, let me just tell you about some of the law-like patterns that the research of Ehrenberg-Bass has shown across markets from B2C to B2B. The first law, double jeopardy. Double jeopardy says that as brands grow, they gain a predictable amount of penetration and market share for their size. And it can be mathematically proven. Remember the MBD derelict. Duplication of purchase says that most markets are what are called repertoire markets, which means that customers buy more than one brand. But duplication of purchase goes further. It shows that if brand A has a 30% penetration, 30% of every other brand's customers will also buy brand A in that market, unless they're a complete niche market, a niche brand. And then this other idea that customer profiles don't differ demonstrably across brands in a market, that means that that customer profiles are very similar. So let's just think a little bit about this. Remember that whilst Kotler thinking in this idea of niche markets and this thinking of differentiation is important, if it can be achieved, we must try and achieve it. Just often it can't be achieved. As I'll demonstrate now, there are many brands that are highly successful that don't achieve it. This idea of the competitive advantage as per Porter is all about differentiation or achieving low-cost status. So what does this mean? Well, let's take an example. And I use this in my class. I use this with clients. I ask students in my class, who here is a fan of Nike? Out of 45 students, I'll get 20 hands that go up at least.
Including myself, yes.
Okay, then I'll say, okay, only keep your hand up if you really, 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 really love Nike. And many students put a couple of students put their hands up, but those other students know they really love Nike. Then I ask the next question. How many of you, and I want you to be honest here, have another brand in one of the categories in which Nike competes in your wardrobe? Every single student has other brands other than Nike.
Absolutely.
There's the point. Okay? And everybody says Nike's so differentiated. Well, if it's so differentiated, why do you buy from Adidas? Why do you buy from Under Armour? Buying is probabilistic. We all have personal repertoires. Once you understand this kind of thing, then you can start to recognize that brand identity as a way of differentiating a brand can be important, but in most cases, it's not really as important as we think. What you want to do is make your brand distinctive. Why? The two bases of Ehrenberg Bass thinking: build penetration through building mental and physical availability. Part of mental availability is distinctiveness. And why is mental availability so important, and this idea of distinctiveness so important? Well, it's quite easy. You want your brand to come to mind easily and to be easy to see in purchase situations. We literally see with our memories.
Right.
So you're walking past this one retail location in Yorkdale, and out of your eye, the corner of your eye, you see blue. And you don't even think, but you know that that's Tiffany. Out of your other eye, because they literally across the aisle from each other, you see red, and you know you're in the luxury goods area. And without even thinking about the brand, it surfaces subconsciously, and the red means Cartier. So yes, differentiation is important to building brands. Building differentiated brand identities can be really important. But in many cases, it's just about making a brand distinctive, easy to see and easy to buy. It readily is elicited from brand memory.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting point, Professor. Now, moving back into a little bit of personal branding as well, what do you think are the most critical steps when someone is trying to build? I think you already covered this, but what would be a step-by-step process in building a personal brand?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a natural corollary to the earlier question. I think you're working me very hard today, taking me from business branding back to personal branding. But you know, I love that in the classroom too, and I think as professors we're used to having to think in different domains very quickly because students are coming at you with all kinds of questions, and that's our job. So I'm going to do my job here today. Personal branding. We spoke about knowing yourself very, very well, and determining what your ambitions might be, your aspirations, determining whether you have the necessary capability, and then understanding what you're prepared to give up. My first job, actually, the first job I wanted to be involved in was to be a fighter pilot. And I'll tell the story very quickly. It was obviously I knew I was going to go into the army. We were fighting this terrible war. And at 16, you actually went for your Air Force test. And in the period just before going for this test, my family had gone on holiday to Durban, South Africa from Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was then known, about 1,000 kilometers away. And we'd flown in, and I ran with a backpack on my back on the sand near the ocean, the Indian Ocean, every day for 3 weeks, 50 pounds, 2 runs, 5 miles in the morning, 5 miles in the afternoon. Why? As soon as I got back, I was going to have to take the test to get into the Air Force Academy, and there was both a physical test and an aptitude test. Anyway, 2 days later, after getting home, I reported to the academy, and unfortunately, they did the aptitude test first, which I failed. So I never did the physical, which was an interesting lesson. Apparently, I can't see spatially things when they're moving very fast. I don't have the capability, so flying fighter jets was clearly out of the question. The reason I tell the story is, if you can't be good at that, it shouldn't be your aspiration. Somebody may want to play cricket for Zimbabwe because we know that that's the best cricket team in the world. And if they're not a really good cricketer, they shouldn't aspire to do that. Or for India, okay, I'll give you a break here. You know, or hockey for Canada, or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
Okay, so your aspiration should be something that you love to do, or at least really like, you're really interested in. It can be an endeavor, a mission, as it will. The second thing is this idea of, could you be good at that? And the third thing is, this whole idea of what are you prepared to give up? So in my teaching, People think teachers don't work hard. That's because they don't know. I mean, I've been a corporate executive. I am an advisor. I am a teacher. The first couple of years that I taught at Schulich, I had to give up every weekend because I didn't have courses. I was teaching other people's courses. I didn't really have a view yet on what a course should look like. I spent this whole weekend and the previous week rewriting my EMBA course that I'll be teaching in November. Your work is never done because there's always new knowledge. So this idea of what do you aspire to do? Now you understand teaching and advising was within the gambit of my values, the orbit of my values. It made sense for me. Could you be good at that? I already had some sense I could be good at that from some things I'd done earlier in my life, being an army officer, being an executive. I loved coaching people. It was my big thing. And then, of course, this idea, what are you prepared to give up? And I knew that if I was going to be a teacher, there was only one choice for me, and that was to be completely and utterly committed. So I knew what I'd give up. I'd give up other things that needed to be given up in order for me to do my job properly. And that would be my advice to anybody who wants to build a personal brand. And then you have to go and do. You have to build your profile. So you build by doing.
That's again a great segue into now assuming someone is able to amplify their personal branding. How do you think this affects someone's professional career, or can you share examples where you've seen this play out? You've already shared one really good example, but anything else that?
Yeah, look, I'm going to go back to the Mark Ritson story because there are many stories I could tell. I mean, the obvious one would be Steve Jobs or, et cetera, et cetera. But let's go back to Mr. Mark Ritson. He started his life as an academic. I don't think he had any idea at that stage, not from anything I've read, that would have suggested he would end up where he is today. The one thing that still, though, is totally his orbit is this love of marketing in the same way as it is mine. I wanted to build a brand of small fame, small F fame. I think Mark was always destined to build a brand of big F fame. So I know I've earned a very good reputation at Schulich. These awards that you speak about with my clients, with companies where I've worked, and that's what I aspire to do. Mark's ambitions, I think, over time became much larger. He wanted to build a personal brand that spanned the entire globe, and he's done that. But in order to do that, he had to have vehicles that allowed him to build the kind of profile, the mental availability. You come readily to mind when people think about marketing and brand management and taking courses. And I think his primary vehicle for doing that was to become a columnist, a weekly columnist for Marketing Magazine in the UK. And that was after his academic career and after winning teaching awards at some of the most prestigious US universities. He does that, but then he also teaches the mini MBA marketing and the mini MBA brand management. And there's a new course now, the mini MBA management for the same organization. And literally thousands of students from around the world have taken his courses. He speaks around the globe. That's how you build a brand of international stature. If you want to build a brand of local stature, you do those things more locally. I hope that provides you with some perspective, maybe.
Absolutely. That again, now moving into your teaching and how you captivate audiences. As a multiple-time recipient of Teaching Excellence Awards, what principles guide your approach to teaching and engaging students?
I'm going to be repeating myself here, but I think I do believe that this aspect is very important. Match what you do with who you are. In 2002, when I sat down and I thought, I'm always creating brand frameworks, strategic brand platforms for corporate brands. Why am I not doing this for myself? and what possibilities exist in terms of frameworks that could be used for personal branding. And I did a big interrogation, as I always do, because I thought that that's what I was going to do in my personal branding class, of different ways of thinking and researching and doing this kind of stuff. Ultimately, most of them came down to the same thing, which is this idea of know yourself and your ambitions well, know what your potential is in that area, and then this idea of what are you prepared to give up to do that very well. And then, of course, are you going to build small F fame or big F fame? Because I will tell you, if you don't build one of those in the world today, you will be irrelevant. And so what informs my teaching most, I think, are my values. I think what students want from a professor is that, I mean, I started teaching at Schulich 20 years ago. I know I still look the same today. I'm joking.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I was in my early 40s. If I was still teaching today what I was teaching then, how valuable do you think my classes would be for students at Schulich? So this idea of lifelong learning has to profoundly, it's got to be a part of all of us, business executives and educators alike. So I do that. The second thing is this whole idea of, if I don't do that, what's the value of taking my class? Because I can't help students be at the leading edge of knowledge that they deserve to be at, given what you're all paying for a master's degree at the Schulich School of Business. And then this third part of this is, again, my value of humanity. Treat students, especially master's students, as if they're adults. I'm very demanding, as you will see if you take my class. People say I'm always tough on grading. But I'm not. But by the way, my average always ends up being a B+, which is it's supposed to be at. But I'm demanding because I want students to take away something valuable from my class. It's not my own ego. I want them to really take away valuable learning. And I think if we take those three things, that's what I love about what I'm doing. It's this idea of lifelong learning, catalyst for better, humanity, packaged together, and it fits my soul. It fits my intellect. What can I say?
Absolutely. I love the point where you said that if you were teaching something that you were teaching 20 years ago about how relevant that information would be. That brings me to my next question, where there's a lot of technology.
Sorry, two last questions. So after this, let's have.
Okay, cool. All right. Sorry about that, Professor. So just wanted to ask you, with a lot of information that's coming out and staying abreast with like the technology that's coming up, how do you keep yourself up to date with the information, and which information sources do you usually trust?
Oh, that's a very loaded question. Look, over the last 10 years, we have learned another lesson. 10, 15 years, we've learned another lesson. That was the lesson that new shiny baubles are never become what they're predicted to become. So what I'm talking about now specifically is the idea of mainstream media versus digital media. What we saw with the digital age was that everybody wanted to catch onto the shiny bauble and turn all of their marketing communications into digital, which is not a bad idea. The problem is too much of it was sales activation, which is really around the idea of paid and organic search. In my class, you'd learn that paid and organic search are really a form of physical availability. They're storefronts on the internet which allow people to readily buy your goods. So physical availability has three aspects to it. I've already spoken about mental availability. That is the ideal of presence. Are you where consumers would like to buy? Prominence. How easy are you to see? And then this idea of portfolio. Do you have the right portfolio of goods that consumers might be looking for in a particular category? So paid and organic search are just that. It's like sales activation. And then, of course, to make it worse, marketing executives, probably because of the pressure from the CFO in organizations, wants to evaluate everything based on return on investment. And it's this madness because they don't seem to understand that return on investment is an efficiency measure. It's not a measure of effectiveness, which has scale to it. So very recently, a gentleman called Professor John Dawes from the Ehrenberg Institute wrote about, it's a heuristic. It's created as a heuristic, but it's meant to guide us in our thinking around this. It's called the 95-5 rule. And it's a very simple heuristic. In business markets, in many business markets, the inter-purchase period between purchases is about 5 years. Well, if you think about that, what that would mean is that about 20% of buyers are in market every year. But now let's take that to a quarter. That means about 5% of buyers are in market every year. So if so much of your marketing communication and your spending is going to try to get those 5% to buy from you again, and we're not even talking about new buyers coming into the category, how do you ever win? Yeah. So you need two streams of communication. You need communication which begins to build mental availability with buyers before they're in market, again, or in market for the first time. So when they come into the market, your sales activation will work more efficiently even with them. But at the same time, you're building your brand with those people who are not in the market. So when they come into the market, they might start their search activity with your brand. Let me give you an example. When COVID first hit, we went to asynchronous learning, from home, as it were. Well, it was synchronous, but it was synchronous digitally, using a Zoom. I told students that I'd had to buy a large computer monitor because I was teaching from my little laptop and everyone was looking up my nose. When my beautiful big screen arrived from Apple, I didn't think about it. Everything from Apple has a camera in it already, but this screen arrived and it had no camera. So that next class I taught students, they were still looking up my nostrils. Terrible. After that class, I immediately decided I was going to buy a webcam. I know nothing about technology. I'm not a big technology fundi. Only one brand came to mind, and I don't know why. I'd never bought it before, Logitech. So you see, I started my search, not Amazon webcams or Best Buy webcams. I actually started my search with Logitech Amazon, Logitech Best Buy, just to do price checks. With the walled gardens that these retailers are putting up today, more than ever, we want potential buyers of our brand to start those kinds of search activities already having mental availability of our brand when they choose to enter a category. We need to create marketing communications that do these two things. Now, that's a partial answer to your question, because the next part would be the implications of AI, robotics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say we must investigate all of these things. But don't ever forget the basics. Don't ever forget the basics, and that's my point.
I love that. That's a great point, Professor. Now, we just want to end it on a little bit of a positive note.
I hope that this has all been positive enough for
it
you.
has.
And I'm just teasing you.
Absolutely. But again, we've spoken a lot about what built your career, what are your values. What advice would you give to somebody, again, starting out in brand management? Are there any common misconceptions that you'd like to address?
Yeah, when I finish my personal branding class, which is actually my last lecture, because the next class is actually presentation of group projects. Lecture 12 is actually presentation time. I ask always, who here is finishing their MBA this semester? Or if it's in the summer semester, I know that the whole class is finishing their Master's of Marketing. I know that my EMBA students will take some classes still after they finish mine. But in those classes where I know I have MBA students finishing class, I always say to them, who here is finishing? I get some hands up and I go, good. At the end of next week's class, we will celebrate together your completion. And then I exhort everyone in the class to never forget that what they've learned in their MBA should only be a starting place for lifelong learning. And I give them another story, because I'm full of stories. I tell them that when I was in my early 30s, I got a black belt in Shotokan Karate. My karate teacher was Masami Suroka. He's very famous in traditional karate around the world. You can look him up. Go to Wikipedia and you will find a wonderful profile written about him there. But when he presented us with our black belts, he didn't say, now you are all trained killers. Instead, he said a very simple line which I've never forgotten. With all the knowledge we had gained, it took me 7 years to get this knowledge. And there were weeks I trained 4 2-hour sessions a week. He simply said, now you can be good students. How's that for a philosophy for those people who are starting their working careers to take with them into their careers? Now you can be good students. Engage in lifelong learning. Take other courses, even if you take your MBA. Remember, knowledge changes. In 5 years' time, people will be taking stuff on MBAs you haven't taken. There's executive education. Read, read, read. Soak in stuff in the work environment. Take on special projects in the work environment. Build your networks. These are all incredibly important lessons.
Absolutely. Just moving on to a final question. For MBA and master's students like us, what skill sets do you think will be the most valuable when they enter a world of rapid change, like you've said, and digital transformation?
I'm going to simply kind of reiterate a little bit what I said already. Explore everything that's new. But just because it's new, and you might dabble in it, don't think it changes the basics. How do consumers buy in markets? How do they choose between brands? What are these repeatable patterns that Ehrenberg Bass has been shown to exist? Go back to the basics. Figure out how these new technologies fit within your toolbox. That may require some experimentation, but don't make some of the mistakes that people have made, that companies have made in the past 10, 15 years with digital marketing, moving it so far to sales activation that they forgot to cultivate also the brand in the mind of those who are not in market currently. And by the way, you need to refresh their memories so when they come back into the market, they're thinking about your brand. And for new buyers, you need to inculcate in their memories mental availability of your brand. And that would be my advice. Read about them, dabble in them, include them in your toolbox in a meaningful way, only if they meaningfully meet some of the real marketing challenges you face.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much, Professor. This was truly a very insightful session, and I hope it inspires more people to actually engage in marketing and really look at the subject in a different light than it is already.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I was delighted to be here. And I would say to any of the MBA or Master of Marketing students or anyone who's part of the Marketing Association at the Schulich School of Business, come and take my class. Come and take my class, challenge me over some of these concepts, come and learn, come and help me learn. Let's take your backgrounds and where you've worked. Let's take different lessons from all of these different business contexts. Let's talk about them, let's discuss them, let's learn from them, and let's learn from the knowledge that exists in the field already. Thank you. I really appreciate the time
Absolutely,
that
Professor.
you've spent with me today.
Thank you.